She checked into a quiet Moscow hostel for one night, but by morning the guestbook held her name, and no record of her ever leaving. The Moscow Hostel Murders, Russia. It was snowing heavily that night in Moscow. The streets were silent, buried under layers of white frost. Inside the old brick hostel on Bolshaya Nikitskaya Street, the air was thick with the smell of damp wood and cigarette smoke. Lena, a 23-year-old student, pushed open the creaking door to room 14. Her breath turned to mist as the weak heater struggled against the cold. She hung her coat, glancing at the bunk beds lined against the wall, 3 of them empty, 1 occupied. A man was sitting on the lower bunk, his back turned, shoulders stiff. He was not one of her usual roommates. His jacket was torn, his boots covered in slush, and his hands were motionless on his knees. "Are you new here?" Lena asked softly. No answer. The man's head tilted slightly, just enough for her to see his reflection in the cracked mirror. Pale skin, hollow eyes that seemed to stare through her. She stepped back, heart thudding against her ribs. Outside, the wind howled through the narrow window frame, whistling like a whisper. The light flickered. For a second, everything went dark. When it came back on, the man was gone. Only his boots remained, wet footprints leading toward the hallway. She opened the door and peered out. The corridor stretched long and empty, the yellow bulbs humming faintly above. Someone was crying in the distance, faint, broken sobs echoing down the hall. Lena followed the sound, her steps slow, cautious. Each board groaned beneath her weight. The smell of bleach mixed with something metallic filled the air. As she turned the corner, she saw it, a trail of red streaking across the tiled floor, disappearing into the communal bathroom. The door was half open, swinging gently with the draft. Her fingers trembled as she pushed it wider. The fluorescent light inside buzzed, blinking irregularly. The mirror was smeared with red handprints, and in the reflection, behind her, a shadow moved, silent, deliberate, closer. Lena froze, the air turned heavier, pressing against her chest. Her breath came out in shallow bursts, fogging the mirror before her. She did not want to turn around, but her body betrayed her. Slowly, she turned her head. There was no one behind her. Only the dim reflection of the flickering bulb and the streaks of crimson glowing under its light. The silence was so complete she could hear the faint drip of water, steady, rhythmic, coming from one of the stalls. She moved closer, one step at a time. Her shoes stuck to the floor, slick with something thick and cold. The stall door at the end was closed, its lock hanging twisted and broken. The dripping grew louder. She reached out and nudged the door. It creaked open. Inside, a woman sat slumped against the wall, her hair matted, her face pale as marble. Her eyes were open, glassy, staring at something that was no longer there. Lena's throat tightened. She stumbled back, hitting the sink. The tap burst to life, water spilling violently as if from nowhere. The mirror trembled from the vibrations of the pipes, and for a fleeting second Lena saw something behind her again. The same hollow eyes, the same pale face. She spun around, but the room was empty. The crying she had heard before returned, now closer, louder, coming from multiple directions. It sounded like the walls themselves were weeping. Her mind screamed to run, but her legs would not move. Then a faint voice whispered her name, drawn out, low, almost tender. It came from the dark corridor behind the bathroom door. Her heart pounded so violently she felt it in her ears. Every instinct told her to escape, yet her curiosity anchored her in place. She stepped toward the voice, one trembling foot after another, her shadow stretching along the narrow passage like a stain. The hallway lights began to flicker again, one by one going out. At the far end, she saw movement, a figure standing still, head slightly bowed, arms limp at its sides. It wore the same torn jacket she had seen before. And then, slowly, it raised its head. Lena's eyes widened. The face was not human anymore. Its mouth stretched unnaturally, its eyes black and glistening, as if filled with ink. It took one step toward her, then another, silent, deliberate, unstoppable. Lena stumbled backward, her shoes slipping on the wet floor. The sound of her heartbeat drowned everything else, the whispering, the crying, even the moaning pipes. The figure kept advancing step by step, each movement smooth, unnatural, as if the body no longer obeyed the laws of bone and muscle. She reached for the door handle, but her fingers were numb, clumsy. The metal felt ice cold, almost alive under her touch. When she pulled, the door resisted, as if something on the other side was holding it shut. The figure stopped only a few feet away. It tilted its head slowly, studying her like an insect pinned under glass. Then its mouth opened wider than it should have, and a sound escaped. Not a scream, not a growl, but something that sounded like many voices layered over one another, whispering in a language she could not understand. Lena pressed her back against the wall, trembling. The lights flickered again, plunging the hallway into darkness for a heartbeat. When the light returned, the figure was gone. The silence that followed was unbearable. She turned toward the exit again, forcing the door open with all her strength. It burst outward, slamming against the wall, and she stumbled into the main hall of the hostel. The front desk stood empty. The television in the common room was still on, playing static. The smell of burnt wires filled the air, thick and choking. She tried to call out, but her voice broke into a whisper. "Hello, is anyone here?" No answer. Only the faint creak of footsteps above her. Lena looked up toward the staircase. Someone was walking slowly down the steps, dragging something heavy that thudded against each step. Thump, drag, Her breath caught in her throat, the shape emerged into view. A tall man in a hostile uniform, his face pale, eyes wide open but empty. A ring of dark bruises circled his neck, as if he had been strangled. In his right hand he held a ring of room keys, swaying gently as he moved closer. He stopped halfway down the stairs and looked directly at her. His lips moved, forming words that came out in a strained whisper. "You should not be here." Then, the power cut out completely. Everything went black. And from somewhere in that suffocating darkness came the sound of dozens of doors unlocking, one after another, all at once. The clicking of locks echoed through the hall like a chain reaction. Each door creaked open just enough to reveal nothing but blackness inside. Lena stood frozen, gripping the edge of the counter for balance, her nails digging into the old wood. The air had changed, colder, heavier, as if the entire building was inhaling. A faint draft moved through the hallway, carrying with it the smell of rust and decay. The television flickered back to life for a brief second, showing a distorted image, a room, a bed, and a figure sitting perfectly still. Lena's breath hitched. That was her room. She turned toward the corridor leading back there, her body trembling but her mind locked between terror and disbelief. Each step echoed unnaturally loud, as though the walls themselves were listening. The open doors on both sides revealed only shadows, yet she could feel eyes following her from every doorway. She reached room 14. The door was wide open now. Inside, the heater was off, the air colder than before, and the single bulb above the bed slowly as if someone had brushed against it. On her bed, folded neatly, was her coat. Next to it, a photograph. She picked it up with shaking fingers. The picture showed 4 people sitting in that very room. 3 faces she did not recognize and one that was unmistakably her own. But she had never taken this photo. Her hands trembled so violently that the photo slipped from her grip. As it fell, she saw something on the wall behind the bed. Faint words scratched into the plaster with something sharp. They read, "Do not stay after the 7th night." Lena's mind raced. This was her 7th night in the hostel. Her breathing grew shallow, panic clawing at her throat. She turned toward the hallway again. But this time, all the doors that had been opened before were now closed. The corridor was silent. Too silent. Then came the soft sound of footsteps approaching, slow, uneven, scraping slightly with each step. The shadow appeared again at the far end of the hallway. Only now there were more of them. Silhouettes of people standing behind it, motionless, their outlines blurred by the dim light. The one in front tilted its head. Its voice came out quiet, cold, and unmistakably human. "Room 14, it is your turn." Lena's scream caught in her chest as the lights flickered once more, and the figures began to move forward together, soundless, filling the corridor like a black tide. Lena stumbled backward into the room, slamming the door shut with all her strength. The old wood shuddered under the impact. Her hands searched blindly for something to block it. A chair, a suitcase, anything heavy. She dragged the nightstand in front of the door, the sound of its legs screeching against the floor cutting through the silence. Then came the first knock, soft, almost polite. 3 gentle taps that made her skin crawl. She backed away, clutching the edge of the bed. Another knock followed, louder this time, impatient. Then a voice low and calm, almost whispering through the thin wood. "Let us in, Lena." Her heart dropped. No one in the hostel should have known her name. She pressed her hand over her mouth to silence her breathing. The voice came again. But now, it sounded like many voices overlapping, rising and falling together, repeating her name like a chant. The door handle began to move slowly, back and forth, the metal groaning under invisible pressure. The bulb above her flickered violently, throwing her shadow across the wall in jagged flashes. She stumbled to the window. It was frozen shut, the glass covered in a layer of ice from the inside. Her fingertips left smudges as she tried to force it open. Outside, the courtyard was empty, no light, no sound, only the slow fall of snow. The knocking stopped. Silence. A silence so thick it hurt her ears. Then, behind her, the sound of wood splintering. The doorframe cracked open, a thin black line crawling across it. Through the gap, a hand slipped, pale, cold, its fingernails dark and chipped. Lena screamed and grabbed the lamp from the table, smashing it against the hand. The light burst, sparks scattering across the floor. The hand withdrew, but the voices grew louder, angry now, echoing from every wall. She backed into the corner of the room, shaking uncontrollably. The temperature dropped further, her breath came out in thick, white clouds. Then she heard something she could not explain. Footsteps behind her, inside the room. She turned slowly, her throat tightening. In the dim reflection of the cracked mirror, she saw them. Dozens of faces staring back, pale, lifeless, their eyes black like oil, their mouths open in silent screams. And in the center of them all stood the man from the first night, the one with the torn jacket. He raised his hand and pointed directly at her reflection. Behind him, the others began to move closer, their bodies flickering in and out of the mirror's surface like images trapped between 2 worlds. The last thing Lena heard before the mirror began to shatter was a single whisper, quiet and final. "You were always one of us." The mirror cracked like ice beneath her feet, splintering outward from the center where his hand had pointed. Each fracture spread with a sharp, ringing sound that echoed through the small room. Lena staggered back, shielding her face as shards began to fall, glittering like glass rain in the flickering light. But the reflection did not vanish. Behind the fractured surface, the faces were still there, pressed against the broken glass, distorted and shifting. Their mouths moved soundlessly, but their eyes followed her every motion. One of the shards, still hanging loosely in the frame, rippled as though it were made of water. Lena stared, her breath trembling, unable to look away. From within the reflection, the man with the torn jacket reached forward again, his hand pushing through the surface as if it were liquid. His fingers were cold and wet when they touched her wrist. She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened, impossibly strong. The rest of his body began to emerge, dragging itself through the glass with a wet, stretching sound like flesh peeling away from something unseen. Lena screamed, kicking and pulling, her heel smashing into the nightstand. The lamp fell to the floor and went out completely, plunging the room into shadow. Only the faint white glow from the window lit the space, and in that half-light, she saw more hands pushing through the mirror, dozens of them, grasping, reaching, pulling themselves free. The sound was unbearable, a mix of whispering, breathing, and the faint hum of static, as if the air itself was alive. The room seemed to shrink around her, the walls began to pulse, faintly moving with each breath she took. Her mind broke past fear into disbelief. This could not be real, it could not. She grabbed the sharp edge of a fallen glass shard and swung it wildly, cutting through the arm still gripping her wrist. It fell limp, vanishing before it hit the ground like smoke dissolving into air. For a moment, there was silence again. Only her panicked breathing filled the room. Then, faintly, she heard something, a low humming sound coming from the old radio on the table. It had turned on by itself. A voice whispered through the static, slow and calm. "Seventh night. You chose to stay." The bulb above her flickered once more, and when it lit up again, the mirror was whole. No cracks, no figures, only her own reflection, except it was not moving the way she was. Her reflection was smiling. Lena froze. Her reflection stood perfectly still, its lips curved into a slow, deliberate smile that she did not feel on her own face. The room was silent now, no whispers, no footsteps, no sound at all except the faint ticking of the radiator. She took one cautious step toward the mirror. Her reflection did not move, it only stared back at her, smiling wider, its eyes darker now, almost black, like the night outside. Her breath came shallow. She whispered to herself, "This is not real." But the reflection whispered the same words back, in perfect sync, the smile never fading. Then, without warning, her reflection raised a hand. Lena's real hand stayed at her side. Her eyes widened as the mirrored version pressed its palm flat against the glass from the other side, leaving a faint print. The surface began to ripple again, gentle at first, then stronger, as if it were breathing. Lena stumbled backward, her legs shaking. The reflection leaned closer, its forehead touching the inside of the mirror. The smile disappeared. Its lips began to move, forming words she could not hear, until the faint whisper finally reached her. "Stay." The word lingered in the air like smoke. And then, in one sudden motion, the reflection reached through the surface again, grabbing her shoulder and pulling hard. She screamed. Her hand shot out for something to hold onto, but her fingers only met air. The light above her flickered violently, bursting with a pop that filled the room with darkness. For a few seconds there was silence. When the lights returned, the room was empty. The mirror stood unbroken. On the bed her coat and suitcase remained untouched, as if she had never been there. Outside, the snow continued to fall softly across Moscow. The hostel's front desk light glowed faintly, the pages of the guestbook fluttering in the draft from an open window. And there, written in neat handwriting on the last line, was a new entry: Room 14, Lena Volkova. Check in January 12. Check out. The line for the date of departure remained blank. And from deep within the corridor, past the flickering bulbs and the closed doors, came a faint sound. A single, quiet whisper of laughter, echoing through the halls of the Moscow hostel.